Welcome everyone to How Cooperatives Fit into Agriculture. This webinar is hosted by National Farmers Union, and in a moment I will introduce our presenter, Gianna Banducci from the California Center for Cooperative Development. Next slide, please. My name is Emma Lindberg. I'm the Education Director at National Farmers Union, and joining me is our Education and Outreach Coordinator, Charlie Michael. We are going to be your moderators today. Before we begin, I wanted to review some basic housekeeping. We will be taking time at the end of the webinar to answer questions. You are welcome to enter any questions into the chat box throughout the presentation. To access the chat box, click on the chat icon located at the bottom of your screen. Please note that any questions you enter into the chat box can be read by everyone watching the presentation. All chats will be recorded, so if there are any unanswered questions, we will be able to capture them and hopefully answer them in a future webinar. We are recording this presentation and will post a copy of the webinar for you to review at a later date. Finally, during the webinar, we ask that you remain on mute so we can avoid any audio feedback that might disrupt the presentation. Next slide. If you are unfamiliar with National Farmers Union, our mission is to advocate for family farmers and ranchers through education, legislation, and cooperation. NFU is a grassroots organization, and we work on a wide variety of issues that affect American family farmers and rural residents. We would encourage you all to visit our website at nfu.org and explore the opportunities to become involved. Since our founding in 1902, we have been advocating for increased cooperative rights, and we have been committed to cooperative education and cooperative development. This is evident in our rich co-op history, which includes forming our first marketing co-op in 1903, supporting the Caper-Volstead Act of 1922, and launching Central Exchange, which would later become CHS. Next slide, please. I would now like to introduce our presenter, Gianna Banducci. Gianna has spent 8 years as a cooperative owner, developer, board member, and consultant. She is a founding member of Our Table Cooperative, a multi-stakeholder food and farm co-op located near Portland, Oregon. Over the years, Gianna has collaborated with small entrepreneurs on organizational visioning, multi-channel marketing strategy, business development, and community engagement. I will now turn it over to Gianna.
Thank you, Emma. And hello, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all today, even from afar. I'm wondering, before I kick things off, if you all would be willing to share if you are a member of a co-op and where you're located. I'd love to see who's represented on the call, and if you could drop that into the chat. Emma and Charlie, if you wouldn't mind actually sharing some of those co-op names shared, I'd be most appreciative. In the meantime, as we get a sense of who's quote unquote in the room, I also wanted to take a moment to specifically shout out the frontline farmers, ranchers, and other food system workers that are on the call today. You know, obviously we're in some deeply frightening and uncertain times, and just wanted to express my gratitude for the courage and commitment you all are showing to keeping us nourished and fed right now. Thank you so much for what you're all doing for the communities you serve. Emma and Charlie, any co-ops shouted out?
Sure, so we have Yvonne from the Big Island of Hawaii. She is interested, she has a co-op question for later. We have Allie from Mariposa Gardening and Design Cooperative. You all type really fast. She's from Colorado, not a part of a co-op. Hopefully she will be soon. Annie is from Ashland Food Co-op and the Board of Directors in Ashland.
Great co-op.
All right, let's see what else. We have Isabella from USDA. I'm sorry if I'm skipping some. Caitlin from Albuquerque, she's the co-founder of the New Mexico Flour Cooperative. Patricia from Food Safety and Food System Consultant. We have Mike, who's an REI member.
Hey, I love it. Co-ops come in all shapes and sizes across a variety of sectors. So way to shout that out. Awesome. Well, thank you, Emma, and thank you to all who shared. Would love for that to continue to happen throughout the call. So amongst the group, you all can see who's in the room. But with that, I wanted to pick up where Emma left off, share a bit more about myself. I am a big fan of co-ops. As Emma alluded to, I am and have been a member of both consumer and worker co-ops within the ag and food sectors between Oregon and Washington. In more recent years, I stepped into more of an advisory and support role with both co-ops and small businesses, primarily focusing on marketing and communication as well as organizational development. In my role as a cooperative development specialist at the California Center for Cooperative Development, I now focus on how to create and grow more co-ops across multiple sectors. Last thing I wanted to note before we dive into the meat of the conversation is to just provide a brief introduction as well to the California Center. We are a statewide nonprofit based in Northern California. We've been in operation for about 12 years. And we provide support to co-ops across all sectors, mainly focusing on startup management and other technical assistance. We're also an educational entity, so we're not only providing that kind of direct outreach and education to both cooperators and support organizations, but we're also working with the public at large to deliver trainings and community events and conferences and other informational literature. So with that, let's move into the program for today. So where are we headed? First, we are going to establish some basic definitions as to what a co-op is. Next, I'm going to provide you with just an overview of the 7 international cooperative principles. Then we will dive more deeply into the type of ag co-ops that exist and how they tend to get started. Along those lines, I'm also going to define some of the key elements of a co-op, from kind of key benefits of being a member to key responsibilities. And then we'll wrap up with exploring some real life co-ops, kind of from a historical perspective, as well as some that we directly work with today through the California Center. And then obviously there'll be some time for Q&A for you all to shout out, things that I've missed or that you're still curious to explore more about. So let's start at the beginning with the most important question: what is a cooperative? For those that aren't familiar, a co-op is a business that is owned and controlled by people who use its products, its services, and its supplies. While the purpose for its existence may vary based on co-op and its members, they're formed to meet specific needs and adapt to change and evolution over time. Some of the co-ops that you'll see out in the world are some of the ones that you've already dropped into the chat, which is amazing. Co-ops, again, come in all shapes and sizes across multiple sectors. So there are housing co-ops, worker, consumer co-ops, additionally, service, marketing, and supply, which is a group very prevalent in ag that we're going to dive into a bit later, as well as multi-stakeholder. And multi-stakeholder, for those that aren't familiar, refers to co-ops that have a couple different ownership groups within one organization. So in other words, 2 different types of members. It could be a worker and a producer membership group in one organization. A common misconception about co-ops that we find, and it was awesome again that Mike mentioned REI, is that there are many consumer co-ops out in the world that people aren't aware of, that they're a part of, and a prominent group within that type of co-op sector are credit unions. So just wanted to take a moment today to debunk any type of misconceived notion that credit unions are not co-ops. They in fact are, and some of the longest standing co-ops in fact in the country, and they exist to serve the need of their banking customers. A hallmark trait of co-ops is that they provide services at cost, meaning that there aren't any non-member investors who are deriving benefit or profit from the organization. So after all costs and expenses are accounted for, that profit is then allocated to member owners. Profit is assigned to owners based on their use of the organization. Lastly, one other thing I wanted to mention that can sometimes be confusing around co-ops is the fact that they are not profitable businesses. For those of you that are members, I'm sure you know this well, that co-ops indeed are kind of traditional businesses in the sense that they need to earn a profit to remain viable and to, more importantly, to serve their members, as well as they have to pay their taxes and subscribe to other legal regulations that they encounter based on the type of business that they are, as well as the sector in which they exist. So in terms of the international cooperative principles, I'm not really going to go into detail to explain each one you see here. I mostly wanted to introduce you to them and to make you aware of their existence. The international cooperative principles are established by the International Cooperative Alliance, which is a group of co-op leaders from around the world. And they essentially guide the operations, they guide the strategy, and the missions of co-ops internationally. So in other words, they're kind of like a set of ground rules to which all cooperative entities adhere in order to ensure that they're fulfilling their purposes and supporting the co-op movement as a whole. So let's head more into the type of food and ag co-ops that we see. First, I wanted to mention that there are several ways to form a co-op entity. Really depends on a variety of factors, primarily the group of folks behind the organization that are looking to establish it. But some of these key elements that really contribute to the formation of a co-op are taxation considerations, compensation, how the members want to be paid, as well as workers' comp and immigration status. So keep these in mind as we walk through these kind of three different categories of co-ops within the ag and food space. So first, let's talk about worker co-ops. So as the name implies, worker co-ops are owned and operated by the workers of the enterprise. They can be applied to pretty much any industry, so they are not only limited to food and ag. We see them take shape kind of through a variety of trades and industries. They're commonly formed based on a desire of a group of people to have more economic independence, to share in the risk and reward of a business, as well as to have a greater community impact. Some of the basic tenets of a worker co-op is that they establish a wage structure together. They also decide on a governance structure, which essentially is a set of ground rules for how they operate and how they make decisions. Worker co-ops will both handle not only the day-to-day operations of the business, but they'll also be guiding that larger strategy and vision, really giving them that independence and ownership over the enterprise. Lastly, worker co-ops, or members of them, I should say, are all required to equitably contribute capital, both at the time that folks join the organization, as well as if there's any type of need that arises due to financial turmoil, or let's say there's a capital investment that the members want to explore. So next we are going to move into the category known as service, supply, and marketing. So this grouping of co-ops is owned by the producers that it serves. They're commonly formed, again, for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons being to achieve economies of scale, to get better pricing on supplies and materials, to address a shared service need. So let's say there's a group of producers in a certain geographical region that are in need of some type of slaughter service, and that's not currently available. Then that group might combine forces and establish a co-op to fill that void in the market, or in the supply chain, I should say. And to that extent, it allows producers to have kind of greater control over the supply chain as well. As I mentioned previously, members are receive profit from these co-op structures based on the amount of use of the organization. And I wanted to kind of specifically call out a bit more the way each of these types of co-ops function. So for example, with a marketing co-op, they exist to assemble, to pack, to process, to sell, to distribute member product. So they're really helping members to gain greater market access. For supply co-ops, now they come about in order to allow members to purchase product, to purchase materials, supplies at better rates. So they're giving them better pricing. And then lastly, service co-ops, again, as I mentioned previously, they really exist to provide specialized services, and mobile slaughter units are really a prime example of that. So again, kind of filling some opening in the market, allowing producers to focus on other efforts. So finally, consumer. Now, consumer co-ops are owned by the people who purchase from them. They're typically formed to gain control over the type and quality of product, as well as to also achieve better pricing. They're really common in the grocery industry. I know, again, there were a few folks that called out that they're a part of grocery co-ops in their areas. So this is where the consumer co-op comes in. One point of kind of differentiation I wanted to make is that in a consumer co-op, the staff or the workers of the co-op tend to just oversee the day-to-day management of the organization, whereas the board of directors will focus on that larger strategy and visioning piece. Before moving on, I did want to mention one kind of final consideration around how co-ops get created in the food and ag space. And what I'm referring to is called co-op conversions. So a trend that we're seeing growing more and more across the entire co-op space is that privately owned businesses, so sole proprietorships, partnerships, will be converted into cooperative ownership. And by cooperative ownership, the most prevalent kind of structure used for that conversion are worker co-ops. So why we're seeing this is that we have a kind of a growing population of retiring small business owners who are looking for ways to pass on their operations. They want their businesses to continue making the impact in the communities, delivering the service and products that they have for a while. So they're looking for kind of exit strategies. So the co-op is a really growing solution and a welcome opportunity here for businesses to kind of continue on. Last note on that, the conversion is not as prevalent, I should say, within the supply co-op space. Again, we're really just seeing it in the worker space. So now that we've talked about the structure of co-ops, let's go inside a co-op and talk about what the experience is like as a member. So where we're going to start with is the benefits of co-op membership. So a common phrase that is used throughout the co-op space is one member, one vote. So what that means is that each member, once they are invited to join the ownership of the business and they pay a capital investment to become a full-fledged member, they are allowed one vote. Now, dependent on the structure of the organization, that vote can kind of come to life in different ways. So, for example, in a consumer co-op, that one vote for consumer tends to pertain to bylaw changes or votes for the board of directors. Now, in a worker co-op, while that vote also pertains to the board of directors, it might also pertain to making more kind of day-to-day operational decisions or strategy decisions. The bottom line being that each full-fledged member gets a kind of a say in the voice and direction of the organization. related to that point, members are also able to elect and serve on the board of directors. So the board of directors kind of being, again, the leadership for many co-ops, members are able to participate and, again, kind of guide the future trajectory of the organization. Next, co-op members are able to share in any profit earned by the organization, by the business. And so how that plays out is once, again, all costs and expenses have been accounted for, any net profit remaining will be allocated to members based on their use of the organization or use of the business, I should say. Within the co-op, each member maintains kind of an individual account, or it's kind of think of it as a bank account, where not only their capital investment to buy into the co-op is deposited, but also any profit earned throughout their ownership of the co-op is also deposited. Now, like a bank account, just like money can be added, it can be removed. So should there be a loss incurred by the business, by the co-op, the board of directors can elect to distribute that loss throughout the membership. So deducting a certain percentage from each member account. Lastly, and from kind of a legal standpoint, co-op members are not individually liable for any debts or legal judgments brought against the co-op. So going back to what I just said around kind of the individual member accounts that each co-op owner maintains, only the amount of equity in that member account is eligible to be used should there be any debts or legal judgments that need to be paid. Otherwise, an individual is not personally liable for anything that comes against the co-op. The one caveat to that is in a food safety issue that can be traceable back to a specific producer member. So just like any other distributor that you might sell to, if there's a food safety violation and it is found to be coming from your farm or your ranch, then you would be held responsible for that. The co-op would not. So to wrap things up in terms of benefits, the last one I wanted to mention is around prioritization of member product. Now, this is really pertinent for marketing and service co-ops. So in a marketing co-op where the business is serving its producers by selling product, what this means is that member products would be prioritized for sale over non-members. Now, in a service co-op, it means that member service needs would be prioritized or would be put first over non-members as well. Okay, let's balance out the benefits with some responsibilities of being a co-op member. So first and foremost, a prospective co-op member is required to meet certain eligibility requirements in order to become a full-fledged member. And these eligibility requirements are experienced or are folks work to fulfill them during what's known as a candidacy period. So eligibility requirements are outlined in the policies and the standards of the co-op, and they vary by co-op. Some examples within producer co-ops are requirements pertaining to the location of your operation, your production standards, how much you sell through the co-op. However, the bottom line is that, during this candidacy period, you have to essentially show that you've fulfilled these standards in order to be invited to buy into the business. My previous executive director from a prior co-op where I work, he used to refer to this as a dating period, mostly because it really is reminiscent of that time where the co-op can assess if you're a fit for the co-op, and you can assess if the co-op is a fit for you. Before things get really serious. So once you complete that candidacy period and you are invited or voted in by the membership, you are required to make a capital investment in the form of what's known as a membership share at a specified amount. So again, this varies by co-op. It's written into co-op policy, decided by the membership. Most co-ops will allow some type of payment program pertaining to the membership share, because it does range in, several $1,000s depending. But you do have to at least make some type of percentage payment or the full payment in order to enact your membership. Additionally, aside from this initial capital investment, you may also be required to contribute capital, as I mentioned earlier, should there be some type of economic downturn and the business needs money to stay afloat. Alternatively, if the business is thriving and you're looking to expand or grow your co-op, then the leadership, or I should say the board of directors, might put a call out to members to contribute another capital installment. So lastly, in terms of responsibilities, which is more pertinent to marketing co-ops, but members are required to meet certain production, packing, distribution, and sales requirements. So this is more like when a prospective member enters into the organization, becomes that full-fledged co-op member, in order to keep, product standards in line, in order to meet a certain quality level, in order to fulfill customer expectations and, remain competitive in the market, the co-op will set internal policy around production, packaging, marketing, food safety for all of its membership. So now I wanted to step into a discussion around some real life examples of co-ops. And before we talk about some contemporary examples, I wanted to step back and look at some historical references. So by nature of co-ops being so prevalent in ag, there are co-op enterprises that you will immediately recognize by nature of their size and presence in the market. And in fact, on the next slide, I'm going to show you a few of those co-ops. But I think it's also really important to recognize the groups and the peoples that have set a very strong foundation for co-ops over the years and whose stories might not be as well known. So before co-ops became even formalized entities, many cooperative values and beliefs were and continue to be inherent among indigenous peoples that have stewarded the land for generations in the US. I had previously mentioned the 7 international cooperative principles. So specifically calling out the principles that relate to care for the community, self-help, self-responsibility. So these are examples of tenets within many native tribes that have existed for centuries and continue to be present in these communities and are very relevant to the cooperative movement. So next, I wanted to move into talking about the kind of movement and evolution of co-ops during the 1800s. And what happened during this time is that, Black farmers really rose as cooperative leaders in the South. In 1886, specifically, the Colored Farmers National Alliance and Cooperative Union was established by Black farmers. And this organization was established to provide a lot of familiar needs that co-ops offer today, specifically, offering member loans, providing training on farming, as well as offering better pricing on the bulk purchase of materials and supplies. And from this time on, many cooperatives continue to emerge within Black agricultural communities of the South in order to address the discrimination and economic disenfranchisement experienced by many of these farmers. Okay, so from the 1800s now, we're going to move into the 20th century. So some of the largest agricultural businesses in the US are cooperatives, and they mainly focus on one specific crop. So Blue Diamond that you'll see on this slide, they focus on almonds in California. And in fact, they have over 3,000 members that make up almost half of all almond growers in the state. These co-ops were established primarily to convene around a common purpose of having mostly non-perishable product that needs some type of value-added processing. And in the early 20th century, some of these organizations came about in response to the farm crises that were taking place, as well as the connection between the rural and urban divide. They were formed to address issues around, shared transportation needs, to establish greater market stability, as well as owing to some mistrust from existing, owing to mistrust of existing players in the supply chain. So some producers were feeling that they were being shortchanged, or that the product quality wasn't there by some of the middle people in the supply chain. So they wanted to take things into their own hands and have kind of greater control and say over what was happening to their product after it left their farms and ranches. Lastly, another kind of major contributing factor was that certain growing regions were really just exploding across the country. Again, kind of going back to a California reference, for us in the early 20th century, grapes, specifically raisins, were really taking off in the San Joaquin Valley. So while market failure was like an original impetus for the creation among a lot of these larger ag co-ops that still exist, we're seeing a much different trend today across the cooperative space within ag and food. There's a greater prominence of small to medium-sized farmers convening in regional market-based co-ops, especially food hubs. And the reasons for the creation of these entities today are somewhat similar to some of the rationale that I just presented tied to these larger ag co-ops, but they do differ somewhat as well. So folks are creating co-ops now in these kind of more market-based regional formats in order to address a need, again, of getting product to market. Folks are looking to offer more product diversity to buyers as well, and they know that pulling their product will allow them to achieve this. Additionally, there's various innovations in the food system that people are trying to explore by creating a co-op. And lastly, farmers and ranchers just want to increase the time that they can farm and ranch. So in other words, they're looking for co-ops to kind of fulfill those service needs so they can remain in the field. So with that, I am going to introduce you to a couple of co-ops that we serve through the California Center, two that are very near and dear to my heart, slightly different from one another. The first is Feed Sonoma. Now, Feed Sonoma is a privately owned food hub that is currently in process of converting to a multi-stakeholder co-op. We're literally just months out from finalizing its formalization as a co-op. And it'll roughly have about 30 member owners at that time of conversion. And by multi-stakeholder, this co-op will have two different membership classes. The first is the workers or the employees of the food hub, and the second are the producers, so the farmers and ranchers that are selling product through the food hub. The co-op is located in the San Francisco Bay Area, primarily focuses on wholesaling product right now, wholesaling produce and meat. But sadly, as I'm sure a few of you on the call have experienced, they were hit hard by the pandemic, so they quickly pivoted and were able to launch a multi-farm food box that's customer direct, since a lot of their wholesale customers were shut down. I wanted to speak a bit more to the experience of this organization in terms of converting to a co-op. Now, the existing owner had a really strong vision of how he wanted the future of this business to be. He's very mission aligned, and to him, the reason that he essentially created the business was to serve this community of growers. So it made kind of complete sense for him to want to pass the business off to this group in order for them to continue stewarding the organization and have it serve their needs. In terms of this conversion process, what happened was that after the sole proprietor decided on wanting to sell the business, he went to the community of growers and his employees and kind of set forth his intentions. And a committee was established, so a representative committee of growers as well as a few employees, and they have been tasked with ushering in this conversion. So they've been meeting for over a year to not only kind of make decisions around the sale of the business, but to also establish eligibility requirements like we were discussing earlier, create co-op policy, and essentially finalize the overall conversion. So next, we are going to jump from a food hub to a worker co-op, also based in Northern California, but this time north of Sacramento. Flying V Farm is a worker co-op with 2 current worker members. They previously had 4, but sadly, a couple of their existing members took a different path, which that point kind of highlights one of the challenges and opportunities that we see within the worker co-op space for farms. And those being that, the worker co-op really sets the stage for a path to ownership for young and beginning farmers, since the capital investment can be pooled, and often, there's other resources available to support the creation of their farm. However, at the same time, you're also looking for people that are of the entrepreneurial spirit, that are of that ownership mentality. So, you're looking for business partners essentially, and that can also sometimes prove challenging in trying to recruit new worker owners. Another point about the structure of Flying V that I wanted to make is that they are they're incorporated as an LLC, which we see for worker co-op farms. So their partners are considered kind of working as owners. So they get paid out of owner draws. There's no wages. And that allows some benefits, which come with some, comparable risks as well. By being owners of the business and not considered employees, they avoid having to pay workers' comp, or I should say, in general, LLCs can avoid that cost. So obviously there's that savings, however, it does expose the business to more risk. Another kind of benefit of the LLC structure is it really suits people that might have difficulty around their immigration status or they're undocumented. The LLC structure does allow ownership by foreigners, essentially. In terms of what Flying V does, they, just to give you kind of a little bit more background, they are a mixed veg and produce operation. So they have many perennial orchards as well as a small market garden, and they're in a local farmers market and also some regional grocery co-ops, which kind of brings me to how they reflect that innovation in the market I was talking about. So by being a co-op themselves and then outreaching to local co-op grocers, they've been able to kind of create new sales and outreach opportunities for themselves, not only in terms of kind of marketing their product and getting new folks to the farm, but they've also been able to have discussions with their co-ops, with their grocery co-ops, I should say, around launching a new product. So they have a variety of apples on their farm that was very prevalent in the region previously, but hasn't been grown for a while. So they went to their produce manager at one of the grocery co-ops and was able to have the discussion and kind of make a commitment for a sales relationship on that specific product. And so that really demonstrates, one of the benefits of co-op to co-op collaboration, which is inherent in the movement as a whole, ingrained in those 7 international cooperative principles I mentioned, in fact. So a lot of co-op farms find benefit in selling to co-op grocers in terms of achieving better pricing, mission alignment, collaboration possibilities, like I mentioned, and also just similar customer bases. It allows those farms to reach some of the customers that they might not have previously done if they weren't selling through the grocer. So to wrap up, before we move into Q&A, I wanted to leave you with some tangible takeaways. So we've talked about, how co-ops are structured within the ag space, some of the key elements of being a member, some real life examples. Now, how could you leave this call and show up in the co-op space if you weren't already? So first suggestion, become a co-op member. If not of a producer co-op, then maybe you can explore joining your local co-op grocery store. And if that doesn't exist in your region, then keep an eye out for other, co-ops in certain trades or offering certain services, and, patronize them. And then related to that, if you do join a co-op, serve on the board. It allows you to kind of have a deeper relationship with your co-op, to participate in the visioning and the leadership. And you are able to support not only your co-op's viability and impact, but then also extend that to the community in which you're located, as well, even the community of co-ops that might be nearby specifically. Next, send your product to a co-op, sell to a co-op. So again, maybe there's a food hub that's of a cooperative structure in your area, or consider a local co-op grocer as well. And then from a more big picture standpoint, I wanted to provide these last two bullets in terms of advocacy and fundraising. So if you're able, explore contributing to funds supporting co-op enterprises or even your regional co-op development centers. I know there are many more centers across the country that operate similar to us, so you can get connected there and plug in. Otherwise, there are some national organizations that serve co-ops in a variety of capacity, and one of which is to provide funds to help them get off the ground or even kind of maintain their businesses. I've included two examples here, one being the Cooperative Development Foundation Disaster Recovery Fund. So this fund has been very important to co-ops who have had some financial turmoil, financial stress as a result of the pandemic. And also, I wanted to highlight the Ralph Page Memorial Fund, which benefits the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. So this fund specifically is kind of more of a development nature. So it provides resources to the Federation in order to help, in order to help grow new co-ops and support existing operations for co-ops located throughout the South in ag. And then lastly, you can support advocacy efforts for the cooperative movement. And a lot of these advocacy efforts are geared toward helping co-ops access more funding, as well as technical assistance. So a couple of organizations that I wanted to shout out that are doing this type of work are the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. So they are a membership organization specifically serving worker co-ops, but worker co-ops of all types, so ag included. They do a lot of federal advocacy work, as well as the National Cooperative Business Association. So both of these entities, they're collaborators, and they're actively working to promote and further co-op interests and needs at a national level. So with that, that brings me to the end of a very long run of information, and I'm gonna pause and take a breather, and would love to hear from all of you. I'm assuming, because my chat has been lining up, there's some new questions that have come in. So please share if there's something you're confused about, something I've missed, or if you are a cooperator yourself, would love to hear kind of your experience with your own organization.
Well, first of all, thank you, Gianna. That was very informative. We really appreciate your time. I'm just gonna hop in here and pull out the first question I see, which is from MJ.
Okay.
Do votes have different weights in multi-stakeholder co-ops, for example, a producer and consumer co-op?
Great question. So there is that option to set up the co-op that way, but it all depends on the membership. So the membership at the point of creation of the co-op, they can elect to have each vote kind of have an equal weight between two different membership classes. However, they could also alternatively take a different path and have what's known as proportional voting, which reflects that somebody that uses the co-op more would have kind of a greater weight in terms of their vote.
All right. Alice asks, are co-ops ever part of existing nonprofits? And it looks like actually she and Urban are in a pretty good discussion about that.
Oh, good. That's brilliant. Here, I'm gonna,
So,
brilliant. Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of kind of various ways that co-ops and nonprofits partner. I would say the most common that I've seen in ag is that nonprofits might be incubating or supporting the launch in some way of new farmer worker co-ops. So in that sense, sometimes nonprofits will own the land or they'll provide the technical assistance, the training to farmers that are looking to start a co-op. So yes, there are many kind of creative collaborations and ways that nonprofits and co-ops have partnered or kind of come to partner, I should say.
all right, I see another one here. Could a worker co-op provide labor to the farming community?
Could a worker co-op provide labor to the farming community? As in, like, could it almost be like a farm worker co-op that moves around and provides harvest services?
I
That's how
think
I'm
the context for the question, there's a little bit of a specification. It functions sort of like a temporary help agency, I think was the idea.
like a temporary help agency. Yeah, I think that's possible for sure. Again, it's kind of just based on the group behind it that's launching the entity. I'm not so familiar with many examples of that. The one example that comes to mind was kind of a co-op of farm workers that were providing harvest services. I've encountered that before, but haven't come across that too frequently.
All right. Yvonne asks, do some co-ops use a formula of producer sales and producer volunteer hours?
That's a good question. So what I've seen, what I'm more familiar with is producer sales are how the co-op account for profit distribution. Producer volunteer hours might be a requirement of co-op kind of policy. So in certain food hubs, for example, that are structured as co-ops, let's say they're kind of early in their journey and they're still requiring a lot more labor and support to get off the ground, then those co-ops might write into their requirements of their membership that producers put in a certain number of hours, and they're classified as volunteers. So let's say they might have to help with sales or marketing or even be a part of making deliveries. So I've seen it of that nature, but typically it's only it's only amount of sales through the co-op that are used to account for profit distribution.
Thank you. So you had asked for some co-op examples and co-op success stories. So Annie from Ashland Food Co-op said that they returned 100% of 2019 patronage that year. So many owners donated their dividend to the local food bank that they received $15,000.
That's beautiful. Dude, shout out to Ashland. That's amazing. Like, that's just I think a really brilliant example of co-ops delivering on those 7 international cooperative principles. Serving your community is one of them, if you all didn't catch it, but that's a wonderful example of that.
Concern for community all the way.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any more questions before we wrap up for the evening?
There were a couple questions early on that I had noted down, one from Yvonne and one from Ryan, who's actually a Beginning Farmer Institute alumni, which is a National Farmers Union program. They were asking about food hubs and kind of the relationship between food hubs and co-ops, and maybe how you might transition a food hub into a cooperative, which I know you touched on a little bit, but any other comments I think would be great.
So there are a ton of examples of food hubs that are structured as cooperatives across the country. You know, I had mentioned Feed Sonoma as being an example in our kind of region in California, but Feed Sonoma is actually, like I said, just stepping into co-op status. There have been long-running food hubs across the country that have been doing this as co-ops for many years. So, and how it works typically is we see a group of producers that are coming together to identify this need in their community to have distribution and marketing handled by a separate entity, by them, you know, not having to do it directly themselves. And from that point, they will kind of start into the process of launching a cooperative entity. But yeah, if I'm sorry, I don't recall his name. If he's looking for specific examples, my email is on this slide. Feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to kind of direct you to a few organizations, and possibly depending on where you're located, I might even have some in your region that you can refer to. But yeah, there's just, you know, there's so many different stories for how food hubs get started as co-ops. Primarily, from my experience, it's more about a group of producers creating it kind of from the ground up versus the conversion that was represented in the example of Feed Sonoma.
Well, thank you again, Gianna. This was really fun. Thank you everyone for attending. It was really great to see all the Farmers Union love happening in the chat. If you would like to stay up to date on future cooperative webinars or learn more about Farmers Union programs in your state, I would encourage you to go to nfu.org/join. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.